Hello and welcome to French Philosophers React, your daily philosophical take on the news headlines. This is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of the philosophers discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, September 30th, 2024, Israel launched a rare strike on central Beirut, killing 3 leaders of the Palestinian militant group PFLP with a drone attack. The strike near the Kola intersection was the first time Israel's military had targeted the center of Lebanon's capital city since 2006. Israeli drones hovered over Beirut for much of Sunday, causing widespread damage and casualties. The attack came after a wave of airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, which killed 4 people and wounded 33. Over 1,000 Lebanese have been killed and 6,000 wounded in the past 2 weeks, with 1 million people forced to flee their homes. Commentary from the perspective of Michel Foucault: The Ephemeral Nature of Human Life, a Perpetual System of War. As the latest conflagration in the Middle East spreads its dark wings over Beirut, it's tempting to view Israel's rare strike on central Beirut as an isolated incident, a maverick event that can be attributed to the complexities of geopolitics. But Michel Foucault would caution us against such simplifications, reminding us that the exercise of power itself does not have a reality. It exists only as a network of relationships. Society must be defended. The strike on Beirut is not an aberration, but rather a manifestation of the deeper structural forces that govern our modern world. In his seminal work, Foucault reveals how modern power mechanisms are characterized by their tendency to create a permanent system of war, where the lines between military objectives and civilians become increasingly blurred. Society must be defended. This is precisely what we see unfolding in Lebanon, where the Israeli military has targeted not just militants but also civilians, with drones hovering over Beirut like a specter of death. The news story tells us that over 1,000 Lebanese have been killed and 6,000 wounded in the past 2 weeks alone, a heart-wrenching toll that underscores the reality of war as an all-encompassing experience. Foucault's concept of power as a complex web of forces that defines its own exercise and forms society must be defended is particularly relevant here. The Israeli military's actions in Beirut represent not just a manifestation of state power, but also a reflection of the ways in which war has become an integral part of modernity itself. In this context, violence is no longer just a means to achieve a particular end. It becomes an end in itself, a perpetual cycle of bloodshed and destruction that sustains the very power structures that perpetuate it. The news story also highlights how these conflicts are often embedded within civilian areas, making it difficult to distinguish between military objectives and civilians. This is precisely what Foucault meant by his observation that we are witnessing not so much a return to an older type of violence, but rather the emergence of new forms of violence. Society must be defended. The Israeli military's actions in Beirut represent a paradigm shift in the way war is waged and perceived, where civilians become mere collateral damage rather than protected individuals. The implications of this are profound. If we accept that war has become an integral part of modernity, then it follows that our understanding of power, violence, and human rights must also be reevaluated. The perpetual cycle of violence in the Middle East, with its attendant destruction of civilian lives and infrastructure, serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of viewing power as a fixed entity rather than a fluid network of relationships. In this context, the strike on Beirut represents not just an Israeli attack on Lebanon, but also a harbinger of a deeper malaise that afflicts us all. It's a poignant illustration of how war has become a permanent feature of our modern world, with civilians often caught in the crossfire. As we grapple with the consequences of this violence, Foucault's ideas offer a powerful framework for understanding the complex web of forces at play. Ultimately, the spectacle of violence that unfolds before us demands a more nuanced and critical analysis than the simplistic dichotomies that often dominate public discourse. By examining the intricate network of relationships that underlies power and violence, we may yet find a way to break free from the cycle of war and destruction that seems to define our modern world. Thank you for listening to today's episode of French Philosophers React. Be sure to come back tomorrow for another reflective take on the day's news.